Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Startup Talks. Day by day, Pakistan's startup ecosystem is proving to be an attractive destination for foreign investors. To have a better understanding of how an international investor perceives the environment to be, we are joined today with Minsoo Kim. Minsoo is a venture capital and private sector investment specialist at Asian Development Bank. Apart from being a mentor at Insignia Ventures Academy Singapore, with ADB, he has been part of pre-seed investment rounds for Truck It In and Shoppa in Vietnam, seed rounds for recently announced Rider Logistics and Dastagir, and Series C for Skycatch in San Francisco. So thank you, Kim, for joining us on Startup Talks. How are you doing?
Good, good. I'm glad to join you here. I'm super excited to speak about not just Pakistan as a market, but the venture ecosystem as a whole.
Okay. So how do you perceive Pakistan to be? You told me earlier that you've never been to Pakistan, but you have been fascinated with Urdu. You studied Urdu at university as well. You speak a bit as well. So is that the reason for it being attracted to Pakistan?
Yeah, so I think my sort of fascination and interest in Pakistan started early on. I studied political economy, so I've been studying markets and the cross section of political science and economics for quite some time. And Pakistan always sort of struck me as a market and a country that flew a little bit under the radar compared to its neighbor India, for example, right?
Mhm.
And given the size of the population, given the dynamics there, when I joined the ADB on the ADB Ventures team, decided there hasn't been much capital flowing to Pakistan. Why don't we look there and see if there's any sort of movements or opportunities for us to partner with founders on.
Mhm.
And coincidentally, that's actually when the capital started flowing to Pakistan. So we almost missed the boat, but thankfully, we got in at the right time and have been, very fortunate enough to partner with, exciting and or partner with outstanding founders on exciting ventures like Ryder, Trek It In,
Mhm.
Dastagir, as you mentioned. And we're actually looking at some other opportunities to partner with founders on at this very moment.
Okay, that's great. So, since you are looking at other opportunities, are we looking at some announcements by the end of the year or before the end of the year?
Yeah, so so we've again invested in and partnered with founders on Ryder, Trek It In, Dastagir. We're in very early stage conversations with some other companies in other sectors.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if we'll have an announcement to make, in other regarding other companies.
Mhm.
But you must be aware that Dastagir and Trek It In and some of these other companies are already raising follow-on rounds,
Mhm.
which they've been growing incredibly fast, and we've been fortunate enough to join them on the journey with them. Um, but yeah, so there should be some sort of news coming out soon
Okay, obviously
about our activity
the
in Pakistan
details,
in general.
obviously the details, the exact details cannot come out before time. So, what do you see uh, in Pakistan? How do you see the ecosystem evolving? Because it wasn't like this a year back, right? It all started during the pandemic. What's the
Yeah,
impact?
absolutely. I mean, so Pakistan as a market right now, it's got a much stronger position globally than where it was a year ago, right?
Huh?
But in the grand scheme of things, given how much money and capital is being raised for venture capital across the globe, not a lot of that, not a ton of that is going to Pakistan, considering the size of the market.
Yeah.
So I think what right now is, Pakistan is having a moment right now, and that's great. But what I think is important is to leverage this moment to have long-term staying power,
Mhm.
right? To make sure that Pakistan's startup and venture ecosystem gains a strong foothold, globally, and so that this momentum doesn't go away or dissipate. And I think the important thing to do that is to make sure that we support the founders and companies to grow sustainably, to make sure that to ensure that there's later stage investors for follow-on capital, follow-on rounds, et cetera, so that earlier stage companies can also continue to be created.
Okay. Now, I see that ADB has been active in all pre-seed, seed, and even going up to Series C as well. What particular segments does ADB actually look at, or is it just logistics?
Yeah, so we look at actually a pretty wide variety of sectors. Our thesis is driven based on 3 different impact lenses that we look at opportunities through. So that's climate change mitigation, climate change resilience, and gender inclusion. So climate change mitigation is primarily focused on technologies and products that would reduce carbon footprint. So that could be within clean tech, logistics, if more efficient logistics are significantly reducing carbon footprint of fleets, et cetera. Climate change resilience is really to help maybe underserved populations and communities gain access to services or products like financial services, healthcare, et cetera, to help consumers and populations become more resilient to events like floods or storms, et cetera, that may increase in frequency over time as we experience climate change. And then gender inclusion, for us to categorize an opportunity as gender inclusion, we look at multiple factors. So we look at the composition of the board, composition of the team, management, founders, to see if there are any women that make up the composition, what percentage that would be, et cetera. And we also see if the company has policies with gender in mind. So anti-sexual harassment policies, are they in place? Maternity leave policies, et cetera, things like that. And then finally, we see if the product or service that they're offering or building is helping women gain access to things maybe like credit or business advice, for example, or healthcare, et cetera. So that's sort of how we look at investment opportunities. And so that allows us to look at a wide variety of opportunities, but primarily we are focused on climate change as a theme.
Okay. And since you mentioned credit, fintech is actually a very hot space in Pakistan right now with quite a huge unbanked population. And you representing Asian Development Bank, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think there's a ton of interesting opportunities in fintech in Pakistan, right? And obviously you're familiar with the recent fundraising of Tag, and other players in that space, in the consumer fintech space, like NayaPay, SadaPay, et cetera. And ecosystem players like Planet N also are building their own product, right? Yep. So I think it's a very interesting space. I think it's a massive market that multiple players can become winners in. But there's also very different plays within the fintech space that we're also looking at, right? Within the financial services infrastructure, fintech infrastructure, payment processing, et cetera. So we haven't made any investments in fintech yet in Pakistan, but we are looking at various different opportunities and speaking with founders to see what may be a good fit for us.
All right, that's great. And since you have been looking at the ecosystem, you've had first-hand experience up close. What do you think needs to be done in terms of developing the infrastructure or access to all these services? What can be done, in your opinion, to accelerate this growth further?
So do you mean accelerating the growth for
of the whole
startups, right? So help
of the whole
whole
ecosystem.
ecosystem,
Yeah.
right? Right. So I think there's various things that various players within the ecosystem can do to help that, right?
Yeah.
So the government has its own role to play,
Yeah.
making sure that regulations don't hamper, or over-regulation doesn't hamper innovation, right? Making sure that it becomes relatively simple to create companies and to raise capital for these ventures. And they can also do things like providing advice in terms of regulatory navigation, regulatory landscape to founders who may not exactly be savvy or have experience in the Pakistani market, right? We see a lot of repatriated Pakistani going back to their homes after spending time abroad to create companies. And so, they may not have the on-the-ground experience of creating companies, registering companies and building them up from the ground up within Pakistan. So I think the government does need to do its part to do that.
Yeah.
And investors also need to do their part in terms of, doing the right due diligence, coming in and making sure that they back the right players early on in Pakistan. I think one mistake that investors often make is, and certainly we are included in that group as well, right? They come in early and they get excited about the market, they get FOMO, and they start investing in companies that may not be ready for venture capital. And sometimes these companies go belly up. And when that happens, the excitement that was ballooning up sort of deflates, and investors stop looking at that particular market. And we need to make sure as investors that what we're backing, we have high conviction and we've done the right due diligence. We have to make sure that we're not causing this momentum to slow down or to stop over time. And finally, obviously, the founders themselves, right? They have to make sure that, I mean, they've already taken the very difficult step of stopping what they were doing before and building a company. And so, what I would have to say to founders here is, they've just got to give it their all, right? This startup that they may be building has become their baby. It deserves 100% of their energy and efforts and commitments. And so they owe it to not just themselves, but their investors, their employees, their partners to do their best.
Okay. Now, since you mentioned FOMO a little while back, do you think that all this influx of capital coming into Pakistan, is that a FOMO effect, or in continuation to that, in your opinion, because I was interviewing somebody a couple of weeks back, and according to them, businesses valuations might be a bit overvalued right now. They didn't mention names, but I assume they're referring to startups like Airlift and those kinds of logistics firms. Do you think that is the case in Pakistan?
Yeah, so I mean, I think overall valuations in some spaces are pretty high, right? For the most part, valuations globally are fine, I think. But in certain high momentum spaces, high velocity spaces, we see some crazy numbers. I think in Pakistan, given how young the ecosystem is, the valuations do seem a little bit high. But I think given the potential upside and the room left for growth, there's still, I think, good opportunities for investors to come in on. I think in some cases, there may be, cases where investors who don't have a lot of experience in developing markets see large populations and large numbers associated with a certain country or market, like Pakistan, or certain African countries, right, where they see huge populations and huge population growth and think, oh, this is great. we should get in early and just invest in a lot of opportunities here. Sometimes that works, but I think sometimes in other cases that may not work, because even if there's a huge population, the GDP may not be as high, right?
Yeah.
The GDP may still be growing, the economy is still growing. Purchasing power of consumers may not make it such an attractive market for consumer-driven companies or products. So thankfully, I think for Pakistan, we see that there's high growth happening in e-commerce, et cetera. So a lot of adjacent spaces like logistics, et cetera. I think there's a room for a lot of growth. But to answer your question, I think it's not black or white, right? We can't say it's high or it's not high. I think it depends on the space that you're looking at.
All right. Now, you mentioned earlier about a lot of expat Pakistanis coming back to Pakistan and starting their own companies, and so did term was coined for that, and there are now called Wapistanis, right? And all these Wapistanis, they are educated from known universities, have had a good exposure to international market, and especially in the tech space. Uh, mm, some of them have actually gone out and collaborated with the international VCs as well. Um, and Atif Aman from Indus Valley Capital, he is a known figure and he's leading that along with others too. Does ADB have any plans on that, or are they in thinking about collaboration with some people or some organizations locally in that respect?
Yeah, so I mean, I think those movements and groups are really doing a lot of good work. One group that I'm in, frequent contact with in order to just catch up on the market on, given that they're on the ground in Pakistan, is, and I'm sure you know them, Venture for Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
So ADB Ventures as a team, we do have plans to, I think, partner up with various partners in different markets, for similar purposes. We haven't really formalized anything with anyone yet, but we obviously support what these groups are doing, and obviously, I think over time, as we continue to partner with more founders in Pakistan and support and look to support our existing portfolio companies there. We'll work more closely with these groups, as well as our resident mission in Pakistan, who represent ADB on the ground in the country.
Okay, that's great. So you mentioned Venture for Pakistan. There's a park launch as well. They had a very big conference about a month or so back. Now, Minsoo, what, in your opinion, are the spaces that founders need to look at? Because the idea behind one idea behind Startup Talks was a lot of founders, they don't get any sort of access to incubation centers. They don't know where to go. It's not like this is the Bay Area kind of situation, because it's still in its nascent stages. Some debate that it's not, it's come out of it, but I believe that that case still stands. That's why the Startup Talks also came into being. So what do you think should be done, or does ADB run any incubation or acceleration centers in partnership? Like SOSV has got one, SOSV mocks the accelerator program. And some Pakistani startups have been part of that too. Does ADB have anything like that?
So we did partner early on with some players within the ecosystem to run accelerators in different markets.
Mm-hmm.
So some focused on water, etc. So we are, those aren't active at this moment,
Mm-hmm.
but we do have plans to build up additional presence in different markets.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't speak to what we're doing right now, given that I'm not the focal point on that. But we've done similar things before, and hopefully we will do them again in the future. In regards to your question about what sort of spaces that entrepreneurs should look at in Pakistan, rather than, I think, specific spaces, I think given what I mentioned before about maybe the GDP and purchasing power of consumers, et cetera, and given that it's still a growing and developing market, I think it'd be important for entrepreneurs to understand the macro movements and tailwinds that are driving economic growth in Pakistan, right? And I think spaces where products or companies that are being built help enable other businesses to grow. I think that will be something that entrepreneurs might want to look at this stage within the Pakistani ecosystem, right? Right now, we're seeing a lot of marketplaces, a lot of fintech companies pop up. And our hope is that the ecosystem matures to a point where we'll also see other opportunities in sectors like deep tech, like mobility, energy, et cetera, for us to also consider investing in down the road.
Okay, that's great. Now we are almost coming to an end. Minsoo, do you have a message for all the founders and budding entrepreneurs in Pakistan?
Yeah, I think it's really a message of congratulations, right? The market itself has come such a long way since just a year ago, and even 2 years ago, very, very different landscape that we see today. And while the investors have done their part of investing in these companies and partnering up with the founders, really the heavy lifting was all done by the founders, right? They're the ones who decided to create something within Pakistan. For those who came back, who went back to Pakistan, they decided to risk doing so. And for the homegrown, talents that are building something within the market, they decided to forego going abroad to other markets that may be more established in favor of building something that they hope will last a long time back at home. So, kudos to them. And, I think what they've done to date has been great. And I hope to see, even more companies and even more founders in the future in Pakistan. And when, I think traveling restrictions lift up, I think the first stop that I'll make traveling will be in Pakistan.
You are more than welcome in Pakistan, Minsoo. There's no travel restrictions. Most of them, for most travelers from most countries, have been taken off. And thank you very much for being here on Startup Talks. It was wonderful talking to you, a great learning experience. I hope it is for everybody who sees this. And if there is any help or support that is needed from my end with regards to access to the ecosystem, I know you guys have a local office here in Pakistan that is looking at things and monitoring everything. Even through them, if there is any help and support that I may be able to provide, I'd be happy to. So thank you very much for being here on Startup Talks.
Thank you, Taimur. Always a pleasure.
Same here. Hopefully we'll see you again either online, but it would be better in Pakistan in person. Have a nice week.
Yeah, looking forward to meeting you in person and having this chat and catching up.
Yeah. Hope you enjoy your quarantine then.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.